My name is Anna. I'm 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been treated like the family servant, not the cherished daughter, not the promising young woman, just the one who knew how to cook, clean, and stay quiet. The worst moment came when I was 28, during what was supposed to be a celebration for my father's big promotion. The house was glowing with candles, expensive wine bottles lined the counter, and the guest list included executives my father had spent years trying to impress. I spent the entire day in the kitchen, chopping, stirring, plating, while my older sister, Jessalyn, floated around the living room in a sequined dress, glass of champagne in hand, practicing her smile in front of every important man in a suit. When the first course was served, I barely had time to wipe the flour from my hands before I heard it. My mother's voice, clear as crystal over the table. Of course, Anna isn't working right now, but at least she cooks well. Every family needs one useful child. Laughter. Actual laughter. My father chuckled. One guest politely smirked, and Jessalyn leaned forward, eyes sparkling with cruel amusement. She's basically our in-house chef, Jessalyn added, her tone dripping with superiority. We don't need to hire staff. We have Anna. I froze in the doorway, holding the tray of roasted lamb I'd spent 6 hours perfecting. They weren't even pretending to hide the joke anymore. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter. I was staff. And that's when something inside me snapped. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in the culinary world, I was not invisible. I was respected, admired, even envied. While my own family laughed, real chefs and mentors had already recognized me as one of them. That night, I made a promise. No one would ever eat from my knife for free again. No one. I walked back to the kitchen, dropped the lamb into the trash, and pulled out frozen pizza. If they wanted food from me, if they wanted the kind of flavors only I could create, they would have to pay dearly for it. That was the moment I stopped being their servant and started becoming myself. And if you've ever been humiliated in front of people you once wanted to impress, if you've ever been treated as less than by your own family, you'll understand exactly why I did what I did next. Drop a comment if you've ever felt like the invisible one in your family. And subscribe if stories of justice and self-respect resonate with you, because trust me, you'll want to hear what happened at the very next family dinner. I wasn't born the family servant, I was trained into it. Gently at first, then relentlessly, like water carving a canyon it never meant to own. When I was 6, my mother began calling me our capable one. It sounded like praise, but in our house, praise was a leash. Capable meant I learned to tie my shoes, set the table, carry folded laundry up the stairs without dropping a sock. By 8, I could iron a shirt without making the collar shiny. At 9, I could tell the difference between dust and polish by smell alone. I don't think anyone asked if I wanted to learn those things. They simply admired how naturally they fit me and then handed me another list. 3 years older and born spotlight first, Jessalyn understood the economy of our home better than I did. Where I was capable, she was promising. Promising meant lessons, elocution, piano, debate. Promising meant dresses bought for future rooms she had not yet entered. Promising meant our mother rewrote her schedule so that she never missed a recital or a rehearsal. If I had a science project due the same night as one of Jessalyn's mock trials, my mother would set a timer on the kitchen counter, clap her hands twice, and say, Anna, you have exactly 30 minutes to finish, then you'll help me steam Jess's dress. If I couldn't finish in 30 minutes, I learned to finish anyway. That's how roles congeal, one small allocation at a time, always rationalized, always reasonable in the moment. Jessalyn had talent and momentum. I had good hands. She needed her runway cleared. I was the broom. The kitchen became my refuge because it was the only room with a door that could be closed without anyone asking why. If the living room belonged to performances, the kitchen belonged to transformation. And transformation, quiet, patient, felt like mine. I discovered pleasure in small triumphs, whisking an egg in sugar until it ribboned off the beaters, salting tomatoes until they tasted like summer rather than water, taking a bruised peach and making it speak again with heat and butter. In the kitchen, nothing mocked me. If I paid attention, the food told me exactly what it needed. I learned to listen. By 10, I could read heat the way my father read stock tickers. A pan sings a different note when it's ready: crisp, bright, hopeful. Butter tells you if it will brown or burn by the way its milk solids freckle at the edges. Garlic forgives you once, it never forgives you twice. I also learned the practical politics of survival. It's easier to disappear when you look busy. I kept a dish towel tucked at my hip like a flag of neutrality. If Jesselyn had an audience in the den, I'd move through the kitchen like weather. There, essential, unnoticed. I wasn't a culinary prodigy. I was a girl who stayed long enough in the same room to notice how things worked. My first menu happened by accident. My mother had invited two other mothers after a PTA meeting. Jesselyn was showing them the speech she would give at regionals. My father was late again. The women were chatty, hungry, and had that almost kind tone adults adopt around children, the one that implies you're being graded for your manners. We had nothing prepared, but there was a loaf of day-old bread, a wedge of cheddar, and sour apples in the crisper. I made grilled cheese with thinly sliced apples and a smear of mustard, then served it cut into triangles on my mother's smallest plates. One woman took a bite, then another, then asked my mother if we often did little snacks like this. My mother smiled as if she had. She didn't correct them. She didn't mention me. I learned something important. Some people will eat what you make and then praise the room. After that, the assignments became formal. Anna, make something simple for the book club. Anna, we need a past bite before the charity committee arrives. When I asked if Jesselyn should help, the answer was always practical, never cruel. She's rehearsing. Practical answers are treacherous. They subtract sting from inequality. I could either resent them or beat them. I chose to become good enough that the kitchen felt like a choice, even when it wasn't. At 12, I stole recipes from library books. I wasn't old enough to check out without a parent. I copied ingredients into a school notebook and drew small boxes next to each step so I could tick them as I cooked. I learned to write margin notes like a scientist. Needs acid, bread too wet, less milk, bake top rack, rotate 3/4 through. My mother, seeing me concentrate, would say, "See, capable." If I looked too proud, she'd add, "Don't get carried away. Cooking is a life skill, not a career." By 14, I could feed 20 people with the budget my father allotted for extras and have enough left for a bundle of herbs I'd hide behind the sweet potatoes. I discovered flavor the way some teenagers discover rebellion. I'd roast a chicken with lemon halves stuffed into its cavity until the skin blistered and the drippings tasted like honesty. I'd mash potatoes with creme fraiche and a secret swirl of horseradish because it woke people up without telling them why. When adults asked my mother, "Who catered?" she'd smile and say, "Oh, bench, we manage." If anyone pushed, she'd wave vaguely toward the kitchen. "Anna has good hands." I pretended not to care, but I kept every compliment like a seed in my pocket. Jesselyn didn't hate me. She was busy being a star. She loved how the house bent toward her light, and she learned quickly that I was the easiest planet to borrow gravity from. She'd come in on the heels of our mother's command and say, "Annie, can you help zip me up? And could you steam the hem? Also, I promised there'd be lemon squares. You're the best." Compliments are currency when you're poor in power. I took them and minted another pan of sugar. Puberty didn't grant me rebellion. It granted me context. Standing in our high school cafeteria, I watched boys with carved haircuts make girls laugh with jokes stolen from older brothers. I watched our debate team win regionals and Jesselyn hoisted on shoulders that weren't mine. I learned the precise pressure that keeps a smile in place without touching your eyes. And I discovered the internet. On a hand-me-down laptop, I found an anonymous food forum where line cooks argued about onions the way physicists argue about light. Someone asked if butter clarified at home could be used to finish steaks. A man named Harp, no profile picture, just that clipped name, replied with the gentlest precision. "Clarify if you like the nut. Mount if you like the silk." I didn't understand all of it, but I felt for the first time a civilization in which my instincts were not a quirk, but a language. I began posting late at night under the handle Quiet Heat. I never said I was a girl. I never said I was 16. I just asked the questions that nibbled at me. Why does thyme taste metallic if added early to a tomato sauce? How do you coax sweetness from onions without mush? Salt before or after sear? The answers weren't warm, but they were real. If I was wrong, strangers told me so. When I was right, they argued with me less. At 17, I got my first job in a kitchen that tolerated minors because the chef liked my mise en place list. It was a tiny bistro with a chalkboard menu and knives older than its servers. The chef's name, incredibly, was Harper. He had hands that moved like a metronome and a voice that made compliments sound like weather reports. Not bad, he'd say, which in that kitchen meant, do that again. He watched how I held a knife and took it away until I loosened my grip. You're not strangling a confession, you're guiding a blade. He made me slice onions until the pile looked like confetti cut by a patient god. When my eyes burned and I blinked too hard, he said, salt your board. When I asked why, he said, try it. And when it worked, he nodded once and moved on. We spoke in problems and proofs. It felt like home. At home, the house calcified. My father's job got bigger. His presence got smaller. Jesselyn was a shoulder into bigger rooms. My mother translated any request I made into either an assignment or a scolding. I'd like to work a double on Saturday. You're needed here. We're hosting after the recital. Could Jesselyn help with? She has a voice lesson. When I suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, the house expected too much from one daughter, my mother tilted her head as if I'd pronounced a word incorrectly. You're very lucky to be good at something people need, she said. Not everyone is. There's a particular sadness in realizing your usefulness is the only reliable affection in the room. It's a sadness that turns quickly to anger if you let it. I didn't. I cooked. I saved money in an envelope labeled heat. I didn't know what heat I was saving for. School, a set of knives, an apartment with a door that closed and didn't open when someone else needed something. But I kept folding 20s into that paper as if I were building a hinge. The summer before college, when Jesselyn was 21 and I was 18, we hosted a cocktail party our mother called Small and Meaningful, which in her tongue meant 40 guests who could amplify my father's next ask at work. She handed me the menu, already dictated in her tidy script, and I felt my throat close. Each course was a version of intimidation food, things that looked expensive but allowed no soul. For the first time, I pushed back. Let me add one dish, I said. Just one. And if people hate it, fine. She considered. Fine, she said, wary. What? Grilled peaches with torn mozzarella, basil, and a warm balsamic honey reduction, I answered. Too fast for her to veto. And salt. Good salt. She made the face she reserved for indulgences she wanted credit for tolerating. 1. That night, between deviled eggs with caviar and smoked salmon pinwheels, I slid out a platter of peaches blistered on the grill, their sugars just caramelized, still hot enough to wilt the basil, but not enough to end it. I draped torn mozzarella between them, spooned warm balsamic over the top, then finished with a hard rain of flaky salt. People made the sound I craved, not the high, polite "oh" of presentation, but the low of surprise at something that tastes right. They asked where we'd had it cater. My mother smiled and said, we manage. An older woman touched my wrist and said, whoever made this understands summer. I slept that night with my window open and my hands smelling of stone fruit and vinegar and victory. I didn't become brave in a day. I became stubborn. I kept the job with Harper through the school year. I learned stations: garde-manger, fry, grill, sauté. Sauté is where cooks go to be honest with themselves. The heat is unforgiving. The timing punishes dithering. You arrange pans like chess, choose your moves 3 steps ahead, and when you're wrong, the room knows. The ticket machine prints orders like a heart monitor. If you panic, you kill something delicate, usually your own patience. I learned not to panic. I also learned what respect feels like when it isn't coerced. A server called corner, and I pressed back without anyone telling me I was in the way. A dishwasher named Marta showed me how to fold bar towels into thirds so they wouldn't unravel on the pass. The line cooks barked and bickered, But when I nailed the salmon skin, the grill guy thumped my shoulder and grunted, which is basically a standing ovation in line cook culture. No one asked me to steam a dress. No one introduced me as useful. They called me hands, heat, quiet, and eventually, chef. In that teasing way kitchens say it long before it's technically true. I tucked those words into the same pocket as the library compliments. At 19, I started sneaking off to night classes, real ones. A short format fundamentals course where we learned the mother sauces and the science beneath them. I wired the tuition through a prepaid card so it wouldn't hit a household account my mother sometimes scrutinized. On the first night, the instructor asked each of us to say why we were there. People said career change and passion, and I've always wanted to. When it was my turn, I said, I'd like to stop cooking like a guest in my own house. The room laughed gently, thinking it was a joke. I didn't correct them. Jesselyn, to her credit, sometimes tried to bridge the gap. She'd sit at the counter while I chopped and say, "You're really good, you know. You should, go on one of those shows." I'd smile and say I wasn't a show. She'd ask what I planned to do with all this, waving her hand at the kitchen like I'd poured concrete around us both. Work, I'd say. Make people taste things they forgot were possible. She'd call me poetic, and then ask if I could take her dry cleaning in the morning. The summer I turned 20, my father missed my birthday dinner to take a client golfing. My mother made a cake from a box and called it nostalgic, and Jesselyn posted a filtered photo with 3 emojis. After they went to bed, I walked to the bistro and found Harper wiping down the pass. "You hungry?" he asked, already reaching for a pan. He cooked me an omelet the way it's supposed to be cooked. Fast, quiet, no color. He slid it onto a plate, dotted it with chives, and put a spoonful of tomato jam alongside. We ate standing up like thieves. "You don't have to stay where you're not seen," he said. It felt like a blessing disguised as a sentence. By 21, I'd learned to negotiate with vendors to ask why my lemons were dull, to send back fish that smelled like travel. I learned food cost, labor cost, the math beneath romance. I learned that a restaurant lives and dies on how well it listens to its own heartbeat. Prep list, par sheet, staff meal, doors open, heat rises, the first ticket prints, and the night begins. I loved that rhythm the way some people love a hymn. It made sense in a way family never had. At home, the story hardened. When guests asked what I was studying, my mother answered for me. Anna's between things. But she helped so much. Jesselyn, now interning at an agency that specialized in rebranding cereal as lifestyle, would laugh and say, "She's our kitchen angel." I started wearing my chef jacket less at home so they couldn't use it as a prop. Clothes are a language, and I was tired of them speaking for me. Still, I stayed. Because rent is rent, and because some habits feel like loyalty when really they're fear. I told myself I was saving. I told myself I was building a CV. I told myself Jesselyn needed me through one more season. Meanwhile, I took every shift Harper would give me and every night class I could afford. I practiced until my hands knew what to do before my head remembered why. The first time I reduced a pan sauce to the exact gloss I wanted without glancing at a clock, I thought, this is what memory tastes like when it becomes a skill. Then came the night of the promotion dinner, the humiliation you've already seen, and the moment something in me refused to go back into its cage. People often think the breaking point is a shout. For me, it was a whisper, no more for free. The night of my father's promotion dinner began like every other family spectacle. Polished silverware, crystal glasses, and my mother's carefully rehearsed smile. 20 guests filled the dining room, each one expecting an elaborate multi-course meal that would match the grandeur of the occasion. The chandeliers sparkled. Jesselyn moved among them like a hostess trained from birth. And I stood in the kitchen doorway with a choice that would define the rest of my life. Instead of the lamb, instead of the sauces I had already prepared out of habit, I placed 3 steaming boxes on the gleaming mahogany table. Papa John's, Domino's, a local pizzeria I knew would deliver within 30 minutes, stacked like trophies of rebellion. The steam rose, curling around cut crystal stemware. For a moment, silence. My mother's face tightened until her smile snapped. "What is this?" she hissed, her hands gripping the tablecloth. Dinner, I said simply, crossing my arms. It's all you'll get from me for free. The room shifted. Guests exchanging uneasy glances, Jesselyn's sequins glittering like sharp glass as she jumped up from her seat. You're humiliating us, she shouted. How dare you disrespect father like this? I looked at my father. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't laughing. He was staring at the pizza boxes as if they were the ruins of a temple he thought would never fall. You were supposed to make this night unforgettable, he whispered, almost to himself. I did, I replied. Jesselyn pointed a manicured finger at me, trembling with rage. You're nothing but a selfish child. This was Father's night. You've ruined everything for your own ego. My ego? My voice didn't rise, it cooled. For years I've cooked, cleaned, and carried this family on my back. Not once did anyone ask me what I wanted. Tonight, I made a different choice. My mother stood so suddenly her chair toppled. You ungrateful girl, she spat. Do you know how many sacrifices we've made for you? And this is how you repay us? By shaming us in front of people who matter? No, mother, I said, pushing the pizza boxes toward them. The people who matter don't laugh at their own daughter. The people who matter know the value of what she can do. And with that, I untied my apron, laid it on the table, and walked out. In the hallway, my phone buzzed. A new email notification. It was from the owner of the restaurant I had been praying for, waiting for. We'd like to offer you the sous chef position. Confirm tonight if you accept? My fingers didn't shake as I pressed reply. Yes, I accept. I walked out the front door of my parents' house into the cold night air. For the first time in 28 years, the air felt mine. The next morning, the real storm came. My mother summoned me into the living room. My father stood stiffly by the fireplace, Jesselyn perched on the sofa like a queen ready to deliver judgment. You are no longer welcome in this house, my mother declared. You've embarrassed us beyond repair. You're 28 years old, living here like a child, without a college degree, without a husband, without anything to show for yourself. You're a disgrace. I almost laughed. Without anything? I've worked in kitchens since I was 16. I've built skills you wouldn't recognize if they were plated in front of you. The only reason I stayed here is because you never let me leave. You kept me trapped in this house, treated like your maid, your servant, your background decoration. Enough, my father barked. You've made your choice. You've turned your back on this family. Don't come crawling back when you fail. Jesselyn smirked, her voice dripping with venom. You'll never last in the real world. You're just Anna, the house help. I looked at each of them, memorizing the moment. I'd rather fail on my own than succeed chained to you, I said quietly. Then I walked upstairs, packed my 2 suitcases, and left. No goodbyes, no hugs, no tears. That was the day they disowned me, and the same day my life truly began. Because from that morning on, I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was Anna, the cook who had finally stepped into her own fire. And if you think the story ended with pizza on Crystal, you're wrong. That wasn't my revenge. My real revenge was worth more than a laugh. It was worth $10,000, the cost of the elegant dinner my family thought they deserved. Stay with me, because you'll want to hear how this truly ended. The first weeks as sous chef felt like a second baptism. The kitchen was loud, blistering hot, brutal in its precision, and I loved every second of it. I learned how to hold the line when 20 orders hit at once, how to answer without hesitation, how to rebuild a broken sauce in 60 seconds before the past died. The head chef barked, the line cooks cursed, pans flew like weapons. It was chaos. It was home. And slowly, I rose. I stayed longer, asked harder questions, volunteered for every miserable shift. I built menus no one asked for just to practice balance. I studied wine pairings until I could recite vintages in my sleep. By the time I turned 30, critics were calling my food honest and daring. By 32, I wasn't a sous chef anymore. I was running the kitchen. My name began appearing in glossy magazines tucked between photos of celebrities and tastemakers. Anna Sullivan, the quiet storm of American dining. Food critics described my dishes the way poets describe rain. A plate of duck with smoked cherries was called a sermon in scarlet. A tart of black figs and mascarpone was a hymn to patience. My staff, once skeptical of the servant girl turned cook, now called me chef without irony. For years, I had been invisible in my own home. Now, strangers waited 3 months for a table just to taste what I created. And then the call came. One of the most talked about restaurant groups in the country, Glass Walls, Michelin Stars, Celebrity Investors, invited me to open their newest flagship in Manhattan, not as sous chef, not even as executive chef, as the name on the marquee, Chef Anna Sullivan. It was everything I had worked toward, everything I had burned for, and it was the moment my silence with my family finally broke. The first call came from my father. His number blinked across my phone late at night after a 12-hour shift that left me smelling of thyme and smoke. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Anna, he said, his voice strained. I. We heard the news. Congratulations. The last time we had spoken, he had told me not to come crawling back when I failed. Now, his tone was sugar over gravel. Thank you, I said evenly. There was a pause. Then casually, too casually. This opening, it's prestigious, isn't it? The mayor will be there? Investors? Press? Yes, I replied. And the guest list? He asked carefully. Family, of course. I didn't answer. The next call came from Jesselyn. No, hello, no, how are you? Just a shriek through the line. You cannot leave us off that list. Do you know what people will think if your family isn't there to support you? It'll look like we abandoned you. You did abandon me, I reminded her. Oh, stop being dramatic. That was years ago. Families fight, but appearances matter. This could help Dad. His name attached to a rising star. Her words made me laugh. Jesselyn, you never cared about my name until it could polish yours. She snapped back, don't be selfish. You owe us this much. Oh, the word again, like a chain. My mother waited longer, perhaps rehearsing her script. She called a week before the opening, her voice softer than I remembered, almost trembling. Anna, darling, we've been so proud. Truly. We may not have said it, but we've followed your career. I said nothing. Silence is its own weapon. You must understand, she continued, that family should stand together on such occasions. People will expect us there. What would they think if your parents weren't invited? It would be humiliating. I almost asked her if she remembered the humiliation of pizza boxes on her crystal, but I didn't. Instead, I said, you're worried about humiliation. I'm worried about memory. What's that supposed to mean? It means I remember who laughed when I was called the servant. I remember being told I was a disgrace. I remember being thrown out of your house with 2 suitcases. So tell me, Mother, why should the people who silence me now sit in the front row of my success? Her voice cracked, just for a moment. Because we're your family. I hung up. The calls didn't stop. They multiplied. Voicemails piling up with guilt, with manipulation, with pleas. Jesselyn sent long texts, then short threats, then long apologies. My father wrote a stiff email about legacy. My mother begged, bargaining like she was haggling at a market. But the truth was simple. They wanted access, not reconciliation. They wanted the glow of the marquee, not the woman who lit it. The night before the opening, I stood alone in the empty dining room of the new restaurant. The tables gleamed, the chandeliers glittered. The air carried the faint, electric hum of something about to happen. My name was etched in brass on the door. I thought of the years they had ignored me, the jokes, the laughter, the silence after I left. I thought of the girl stirring batter on a stool, the teenager slicing vegetables while being overlooked, the young woman who dropped lamb into the trash and served pizza on crystal. And then I thought of the chef I had become. This wasn't their triumph, it was mine. When the maitre d' asked if my family would need a table on opening night, I paused. For the first time in years, I felt a smile spread slowly across my face. Yes, I said, give them a table. It's time they finally see me for who I am. But in my mind, the decision was already sharper, more deliberate. This wasn't an olive branch. It was the stage I'd prepared for years. The moment to answer every humiliation, every dismissal, with something they could never laugh away. I wasn't just giving them seats at my opening, I was giving them a front row view of their own reckoning. The chandeliers burned like a constellation, every glass of wine shimmering in their glow. The air of the restaurant pulsed with expectation, the hum of expensive conversations and the occasional burst of laughter echoing off marble and glass. This was the night. My night. Every table was filled with critics, investors, chefs, artists, even the mayor himself. And at the center, seated with impeccable flourish by the maitre d', were my parents and my sister Jesselyn. They had arrived dressed for triumph. My father in a tuxedo that strained slightly against his belly, my mother gleaming in her pearls, Jesselyn in yet another sequined dress that caught the light like broken glass. They smiled as if the entire room belonged to them, as if the opening of my restaurant was somehow their inheritance. I stayed in the kitchen, letting the rhythm of plates and knives guide me. My brigade moved with the precision of an orchestra, scallops seared golden, duck glazed to perfection, artful arrangements of figs and herbs that looked almost too beautiful to touch. Course after course left the kitchen in silence, returning minutes later as waves of approval and murmured delight rolled across the dining room. But I wasn't watching the critics. I was watching them. From the kitchen doorway, I could see my mother lifting her chin higher with each compliment she overheard, my father nodding stiffly when guests congratulated him on raising such talent. Jesselyn leaning across the table, pretending to soak in the spotlight like a true star. They believed the night was theirs. They had no idea. At last, dessert had been served, and the maitre d' gently tapped a crystal glass to quiet the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please join me in welcoming the reason we are all here tonight. Chef Anna Sullivan." Applause thundered. The sound rose to the vaulted ceiling, echoing like a hymn. I stepped out from the kitchen, my jacket immaculate, my hair tied back, my face calm. The cameras flashed. I raised my hand for silence. "Thank you," I began. "Tonight is more than an opening. It is a dream carved from years of work, of persistence, of believing in something no one else could see. I am honored to welcome you all, and I am deeply grateful for your presence." I paused, letting the room breathe, letting my family lean forward in expectation. They thought this was the moment I would extend the olive branch, that I would pull them back into my triumph with gracious words. Instead, I smiled. "And tonight," I continued, my voice carrying with ease, "I am especially proud to say that none of this would have been possible without the extraordinary generosity of my family. The Sullivan family has chosen to personally sponsor this opening in full. Their pride in me is so immense that they insisted on covering every single expense, from the champagne you are drinking to the 7 courses you have just enjoyed." The room erupted in applause. Guests turned to my parents with admiration. The mayor himself raised a glass in their direction. "Magnificent!" someone shouted. "Such devotion to their daughter." And then, like a ripple spreading across water, laughter began to shift. The applause softened. Eyes turned sharper, noticing details. My father's face, pale, rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked carved from stone. My mother's expression, horror, disbelief, a vein pulsing at her temple. Jesselyn smiling far too hard, teeth bared in a grin that trembled with panic. The performance was cracking. "What on earth are you doing?" my mother hissed, unable to keep her voice low. She stood, her pearls clattering, her hands trembling. "Do you have any idea how much this costs? How could you—" Gasps from the nearest tables. A reporter scribbled furiously in her notebook. My father half rose from his chair, face red, sweat beading at his temple. "Enough, Anna. Stop this nonsense right now." But the laughter was already spreading. Polite chuckles at first, then louder, unrestrained. Guests hid smiles behind napkins. Journalists raised their phones. Critics exchanged knowing glances. It was a reversal so sharp, so delicious, I almost pitied them. For years, I had been the punchline. Now the joke was theirs. Jesselyn tried to salvage it, clinking her glass, forcing a brittle laugh. "Yes, well, of course, it was our idea. Anything for family?" But the lie was too thin. The room could see the cracks. could hear the shrillness in my mother's voice, the fury in my father's tone. The same parents who had called me a failure were now being dragged across the coals of their own arrogance. I raised my hand again, and the room fell silent. Generosity, I said softly, isn't measured by words but by action. And tonight, everyone here has witnessed the truth for themselves. I let the silence linger, long enough for every guest, every camera, every journalist to imprint the sight of my family's disgrace in memory. Then I bowed slightly. Enjoy the rest of the evening. On the house. Courtesy of the Sullivans. Back in the kitchen, the laughter still echoed from the dining room. My staff grinned as they plated the final petit four. One of my sous chefs leaned close and whispered, "Chef, that was brutal." "Not brutal," I corrected softly, tying my apron tighter. "Just fair." Through the glass doors, I could still see them. My parents, humiliated, cornered, choking on the very reputation they had once used as a weapon against me. The critics would write about the food, the papers would rave about the opening. But what everyone would remember most was not the duck, or the figs, or the mascarpone. It was the moment the Sullivans, once so proud of their place in society, became the spectacle. And for the first time in my life, the laughter wasn't at me, it was at them. And that, my friends, is how years of humiliation turned into one unforgettable night of truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us share more tales of justice served. And I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Anna's Revenge? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.